Hello, and welcome to this episode where I will mainly focus on plant-based diets. You will have realized recently that a lot of people are talking about climate changes, and recently we heard the COP27 in Egypt, where most of the world leaders came together to give their pledge and talk about how they can reduce the impact of whatever they are producing within their countries on the climate and global warming. One of the things that has become much more clearer is the fact that also food production has got an impact when it comes to the climate. One of the culprits, or one of the ways in which the production of food has impact on the climate, is particularly through animal production. What happens is that the production or the rearing of meat does have an impact, in the sense that cattle, for example, are known to be one of the most emitters of greenhouse gases, and these contribute to global warming. And as a result, there's been call to action for people to try and maybe rethink, whereas some people have started by themselves to think of ways and mechanisms on which they can contribute towards saving the environment. And one of the ways that I feel like can be an easy way of contributing towards preserving or conserving the environment is through the consumption of plant-based diets. Before I go into too much details, let's begin defining what is a plant-based diet. A lot of people do confuse this concept. Some people think plant-based diet is basically veganism, or plant-based diet is vegetarianism, etc. But I hope that by the end of this session, I'll have actually tried to differentiate, or maybe to debunk some myths on what plant-based diets are. A plant-based diet is any diet that focuses on foods that are mainly derived from plant sources. Mention like, and the emphasis here is mainly derived, or foods derived from plant sources, because it doesn't mean that if you are on a plant-based food or diet you cannot consume meat. The difference between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet is that when it comes to the vegan diet, most of the time it prohibits the eating of any sort of meat product, depending on, of course, how strict a vegan person can be. But when it comes to plant-based diets, you can still consume animal products, but in minimal or in small quantities. Where, okay, when you're looking at these plant-based diets, usually the focus or the emphasis is on plant sources such as fruits and vegetables, grains, pulses, legumes, and nuts, and meat substitutes, as soy for sure. But again, as I mentioned, it doesn't mean that you cannot consume products from animal sources. It's just that their consumption is usually reduced or at a very minimal. Just before I go into so much details to look at these plant-based diets, I just wanted to start with a few facts. Like, did you know that a healthy plant-based diet does usually maximize on the consumption of what are known as nutrient-dense plant foods, whereas things like foods, oils, and animal foods, which includes things like dairy, etc., are minimized. Again, as I said, you're not completely eliminating foods from animal sources, but you're minimizing that. And when you are on a plant-based diet, the focus or the shift or the goal is mainly looking at nutrient-dense plant-based foods, and not necessarily going towards the processed food, because you can still be, let's say, on a vegan diet and still go for processed vegan diets, which can still be unhealthy. When you're consuming plant-based foods, it does usually encourage the consumption of lots of vegetables. These can either be cooked or they can be raw vegetables. And there is usually a caution when it comes to consumption of raw vegetables in particular, because some of these vegetables can contain what are known as anti-nutritive compounds. And if you're consuming them raw, there's a chance that these anti-nutrients can actually end up interacting with your food, and this can prevent the absorption of these these nutrients into your body. So if you love to consume raw foods, and in particular for those people that subscribe on a raw veganism, just something to think about, like when it comes to this type of consumption, particularly of raw food, is again being careful, because you can have things like phytates, tannins, etc., oxalates, which are all anti-nutritives or anti-nutrients that can be in those raw foods. And sometimes when you cook or process the food, it does break them down and helps with the absorption of the food or the bioavailability of the food. You can also consume things like fruits, beans, lentils, etc. And these foods do tend to be low in saturated fats for sure, and they have again their own health benefits to an individual. So let's talk a little bit about the health benefit of a plant-based diet. One of the things that I love about plant-based diets is because you're upping or increasing the consumption of fruits and vegetables. Generally, they tend to have a low glycemic index, and they'll have much more less impact on your blood glucose after you've consumed these foods. And as a result, this can actually be favorable or used particularly for people that, for example, have things like diabetes, and in particular type 2 diabetes, which is just basically the result of insulin insensitivity. And one of the major precursors, or one of the risk factors for type 2 diabetes, is overweight and obesity. And this actually just interferes with the sensitivity of insulin. So if you consume or increase the consumption of fruits and vegetables, what happens is that because of, again, the nutrient content and calorific load, you can end up to start losing weight, and that can actually impact on your sensitivity, let's say, of insulin, and that can actually have a benefit towards reduction of things like maintenance or management of type 2 diabetes. The other thing you can think again of is that these fruits and vegetables are very rich or high in things like antioxidants. We live in a world where pollution rates are very high. You might have heard of conversations around the time when we were in lockdowns, that the air quality became much more purer and better because everybody was indoors, and manufacturing almost came to a still. But now when we've gone back, there's a lot of transport and things like that that can generate reactive oxygen species, but also the type of foods that we eat, processed foods, etc. And these can actually predispose us to things like cancer, because they can have carcinogens in them. And so if you're eating fruits and vegetables which are rich and high in antioxidants, these actually can play an important role in the neutralizing of these reactive oxygen species, and that can actually play an important role, particularly in the prevention of cancer. We know that fruits and vegetables as well, they are low in saturated fatty acids or fats, and these are saturated fats as the ones that, such as cholesterol, that can easily lodge within the body and cause things like atherosclerosis, and this can be a precursor for cardiovascular diseases or things like heart attacks, strokes, etc. And then also, of course, if you are consuming more fruits and vegetables, I've mentioned weight loss, which is something that can be beneficial to some individuals. But again, also there are the ways you can manage your blood glucose, etc. One of the things that I like to emphasize on or encourage is that when you're consuming these fruits and vegetables, as you can see from this slide, is try to go for a rainbow, because they are rich in phytonutrients or bioactive compounds, which can be like, let's say, in their pigments and things like that. So when you're going for colors, choose things like greens, orange. All the different colors do represent different pigments, and those pigments can actually be beneficial. Of course, there are no dietary recommended values when it comes to these bioactive compounds. So you cannot say like, oh, I'm eating X amount of, let's say, phenolic compounds and things like that. But there is so much research that has shown that these bioactives can contribute towards the enhancement of the body's immune function, and that can help you to fight and ward off different diseases and things like that. So next time you're thinking about plant-based foods or diets, think about rainbow, think about variety. Don't just eat the same thing throughout, but try to mix different colors, and that can be more beneficial to your body than just considering maybe consuming one thing, etc. Again, to think about, so there are health concerns about plant-based diets. For example, I've heard people talking about the protein. If I am on a plant-based diet, am I going to be able to get enough protein and things like that? I've been on a plant-based diet myself for more than a year now, and I realized that being on a plant-based diet actually helped me to consume more protein than what I was consuming when I ate a lot of meat. And I probably, because I was very intentional about tracking my macros, that's the proteins, the carbs, and the fats, to see what am I consuming, because I was particularly worried given my lifestyle being very active and picking up on things like running and things like that. I was more concerned that I may not be getting enough protein, and that can actually end up compromising on my muscles, resulting in muscle wasting and things like that. And I realized actually when I eat plant-based proteins, I tend to mix and match most of the time. So I've eaten, for example, lentils mixed with beans and things like that, and that just kind of in a way ups the intake of what we eat. Of course, again, there are people that think about things like iron and say, like, if you're on a plant-based diet, you can end up with iron deficiencies, simply because plant-based diets do tend to give non-heme iron. Non-heme iron tends to have a lower bioavailability compared to the heme that you get from animals. So if you are on a plant-based diet, that's something to think about. But you can eat things like beans and spinach, etc. But again, during the meal times, being careful and just ensuring that you are considering the consumption, let's say, of things like oranges with your dinners. If you're having like spinach for your dinner with something, so that at the end of the day, the vitamin C that is in the orange juice can actually enhance or encourage the uptake of the different nutrients that the iron in your food. If you are on a strict plant-based and decide like you're not including any meat products, so that's you are vegan, it's important to think about vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 plays an important role in different physiological functions of the body, and it's mainly commonly found in animal sources. So if you choose to knock out animals as sources of food completely from your diet, you might want to think of foods that are rich in vitamin B12, like nutritional yeast, but also supplementation, where you can have like vitamin B12 supplementation, just to ensure that you're not lowering that consumption of this nutrient. Other concerns people are thinking about are things like calcium and vitamin D. We know generally calcium and these nutrients are important when it comes to bone structure and bone formation. And calcium, particularly, of course, people attribute it to things like dairy, etc. So if you decide you want to reduce or to limit the intake, or maybe eliminate the intake of dairy, there are so many different dairy substitutes that you can consume. And the good thing is that these substitutes are usually fortified with these nutrients. So through the fortified food, you can still be able to achieve the targets of what you need in terms of the calcium and the vitamin D. Generally, most population or people in the most populations will tend to be deficient in vitamin D, particularly let's say in the Western world, where a couple of months a year that we go into winter seasons and things like that, and particularly as well if you are of the ethnic minority groups. And so if this is something that you are concerned about, it might just be worthwhile at the beginning or before you embark on any of these diets, do take some time and speak to your doctors or speak to a medical professional, and they will be able to advise you on some of the things that you can do. And as well, you can do like a blood typing at the beginning before you go into this diet, and maybe monitor a couple of months into it and just see how does the vitamin D status look like. And if you are deficient, of course, you can discuss with the health professionals what you can do to enhance. So I'm just going to bring this to a landing and bring it to summary and to summarize and make some conclusions. So we talked about what plant-based diets is. These are diets that include mainly fruits and vegetables or plant-based foods, but is not particularly referring to vegan diets, even though veganism can be classified as plant-based, but there you completely eliminate any meat products. When it comes to these, sometimes the easiest is if you're somebody who's much addicted to things like meat. Of course, we know that the reduction in the consumption of meat, particularly the red meat, as I mentioned, can have impact on reduction of things like cancers. So if you are finding it difficult to let go of your meat, you can actually start just by reducing the amount of what you eat rather than eliminating it completely, and that will wear you off of that addiction, loosely to say, to meat products. And of course, once you get used to that, you can go for a longer time, of course, limiting. Maybe you do 2 or 3 times or maximum a week where you'll have your meat products, so that in the end, most of the foods that you consume are more from the plant origin. And again, as I mentioned, if you are considering at any stage or time of your life to go onto a plant-based diet, I will highly recommend this. Speak to some medical professionals, speak to a doctor, a dietitian, speak to somebody that can do some kind of assessment to your body, so that at the end of the day, once you start these, of course, you don't want to end up with impacts on your body. But of course, I don't think there's anything that can go wrong with you just upping your intake of fruit and vegetables, because of course that's something that we all know that it's gonna be healthy. I mentioned this in one of the videos that I've recorded before. Like in the UK, the NHS recommends at least 5 portions of fruits and veg consumption a day. So if you're increasing that, or if you are on a plant-based diet, the chances of you hitting that goal are very easy, and that motivates you in a sense. Of course, there are all those benefits that you get from these diets. So if you are already on a plant-based diet, or you will be considering maybe to just increase your consumption of fruits and vegetables, please let me know. Leave it in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to read your comments and to see what your take is on these diets. And if you have any questions as well, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And again, please don't forget to click like and subscribe. Until next time with the next episode, bye bye.